is Saint Irenaeus and his defense of church orthodoxy from the Gnostics. This may be 2 parts, I'm not sure yet, but I'm going to try to do part 1 of a thesis that I have shown you, links in the description. And you'll be able to read it for yourself. I've highlighted the sections that you're going to see, and so we can understand. And this is from a Protestant perspective. And welcome, Pedro. Yes, I will do that talk on the American Founding Fathers. I'll have to go it alone. I did ask some people, but yeah, I haven't had a response. XYZ, Christo, welcome. Right, give me a 1 in the chat to let me know that my audio is coming through correctly. Andy the Crimson, hello, what's your comment on Too Many Mirrors when you said scholars don't say what we claim they say? Mal has been playing their words verbatim, and I don't see how one can say they didn't say what they said when we played what they said. I think it just causes great confusion. Give me a second. So just so you are aware, on this video, I made a comment here. So this is on Mal's video. Hold on, let me just get back. Yeah, so welcome everyone. Quivering Quasar, nice name, interesting. Quivering Quasar, interesting. Ernesto, Chidin Kennedy, Dragon, of course, thank you for being here. Sandro Correa, hey, I sent you a text on Skype. Yeah, I was just busy, so check Skype, because I mostly use Skype, not WhatsApp. Marion, welcome. PJ, Ben Yosef, XYZ, of course, good to see you. Enki, welcome. Christo, I said already, and Pedro. Okay, yeah, so this is a statement that I made. So I did an analysis of everything that she wrote here, that statement. Okay, so I broke it down with a summary, and then I gave my thoughts here. But so the assertion that her views fit right into the mainstream scholarship, with one exception, is a rhetorical claim. And scholarly opinions on the Quran's origins remain debated. And I think we've demonstrated conclusively that there is heavy bias in academia. Maybe those scholars don't want to get stabbed in the parking lot, like Salman Rushdie, or they don't want to lose the Saudi funding to the tunes of millions of dollars a year to the universities. So this would affect the outcomes. And yeah, they'll say 1 + 1 and fail to tell you the word 2 because they don't want to make those obvious connections and conclusions. So, but look, we'll see how that goes. You know, and the scholars don't say what we claim they say. It's like saying, but the Quran 9:5 doesn't mean that. It says that, but it's not what it says. It's what it means, and it's what I say it means. I don't know. What do you think, Andy the Crimson? What are your thoughts on that? Yeah. So, I mean, this is really interesting, unexpected, and very interesting. Stewards Impact Church and Barrington, welcome. Yeah, for me, this is very, very unusual. Actually, let me just go to my channel. Mary Harb. I mean, I find the surname Harb is Arabic. It's a Muslim word for war. So, Mary with the Muslim surname. Okay. By the way, on my community tab, I've been making some notes. This was one on the Sharia. Should Christians be concerned about the idea of Sharia law? I would like to make a statement on this, right? So I wrote an article here, and also there was this video I saw just recently. I think she drinks too many Kool-Aid. Okay, yeah. Should we be afraid of Sharia law? So I have made now, I think, 2 or 3 public statements. I've left comments directly tagging him, and I've left comments on my own. You know, he's tagged here, and I've tagged him like 3 times, I think now, for him to discuss with me. So please go to my community tab. And I just said perhaps he would be open to a public live discussion on a stream to show and to read the actual laws and offer his commentary as we go. This perfect law of Allah brought by Muhammad should be something Muslims are excited to have the world learn about, because he stated we have nothing to fear. So if there's nothing to fear, let's not say that, hey, Professor Arnold P. Bumfluff from Outer Nebraska wrote this wonderful article saying that, you know, Sharia is actually wonderful. It's all beautiful fragrances, daisies, and cotton candy. Okay, that's nice that Professor Bumfluff had an opinion. That's fantastic. I would rather we just read the Sharia. So, and from bad Wi-Fi stan Albania, Konos Spiros, welcome. I have a full set of teeth. Oh, one tooth. Okay, okay. So hold on. Let me just do this first. Let me start here. I just want to make this a statement. The statement. So this was in regards to Paul Williams, right? Because as he stated, we have nothing to fear from Sharia. Now, you know, people are very concerned, and without the facts, we cannot make a decision. So defenders of Sharia assure us that we have nothing to fear, right? They claim the Sharia is compatible with our values, our Western Christian values, and way of life. So rather than debate this issue endlessly, I propose a simple solution. Let us read and explore the Sharia directly. Okay, directly from its source text with an open and inquisitive mind, right? We need not approach this discussion with fear or anger or aggression, and we have been told that we have nothing to fear from the Sharia, so therefore there should be no fear in us opening the books and having an open, honest, transparent discussion and investigation, right? So let us seek to understand Sharia through a calm, transparent, and honest examination of what it openly proclaims about itself. Not what Professor Bumfluff or Professor Shiton Shu in Japan said about it, but what the Sharia books say in themselves, right? What the books themselves have written in black and white on the page. Apologists need not defend or make excuses. The texts speak clearly on their own. So with the Quran, Hadith, and works of Islamic jurisprudence before us, let the words stand on their own merit. So I extend an invitation to all those. I have invited hundreds of Muslims over the last 4 years to meet with me in the same format, just a discussion. We'll just open the books and read it. I will simply present the laws, read them, show them to the public, and they can comment. They can offer their comments. They don't have to be a scholar. They can just give their personal opinion. Professor Bumfluff. Oh, good, James, I knew it was you. I knew it was you. So, and they've all refused. Every single one has refused. I haven't had a single person accept. Okay? So I extend an invitation to those who want to better understand Sharia law. Let us read, explore, and discuss, free of judgment or confrontational rhetoric. Decide for yourself based on a direct encounter with the text if Sharia poses no threat or if it raises concerns in need of address. Are people rightfully in the West concerned about the contents of the Sharia? So we cannot make an informed choice without going to the source. So this is a call to go to the source. This is a call for an honest understanding and openness, not fear. If Sharia is compatible, we have little to lose in discovering why and discussing why. And if concerns arise, we will know precisely how and where to direct our democratic process to mediate them respectfully. Then we can engage with this as a society using the means available to us. So an open, honest, transparent exploration is the only viable path to mutual understanding and respect between our faiths, Christianity and Islam. The texts remain. Now, who will explore them openly and without fear with me? So the light of knowledge need not threaten, only clarify and embolden the truth. And that's it. That's my statement. So if someone can ask Paul Williams, I will put. Actually, you know what? I will make this comment. I will put this later in the comments. And yeah, so this is my open invitation to Paul Williams, and later on I will make this open invitation one by one to others if he turns me down. And if they turn me down, if there's nothing to fear, then that's really a question. So yeah, so hopefully you guys like this. Yeah, so hopefully someone will find someone with quality, someone who's willing to do an honest, calm, transparent, direct, unambiguous discussion of what is written in black and white. Not, as I said, what Professor Bumfluff said in a book discussing. No, let's go read the Sharia laws from the pages directly. Okay, and now on to today's topic. And so your thoughts on this in the chat and in the comments later, please. Right. Michelle. Yeah, okay. Let me go to where I was. Okay, so this is pinned in the description down below. right? This is called Apostolicity as a church response to Gnosticism in Irenaeus. So it is about Irenaeus in response to Gnosticism and the appeal to apostolicity. So this occurred as a response to the threat posed, the serious threat to the church posed by the Gnostics and by the heretics that were inspired by the Gnostics. And I guess there was some sort of mutual compatibility there between the two. There'll be amazing discussion and discovery of the truth. Yes, I think there is no need for a hostile debate. It's simply an open discovery. So let's do that. Let's just have an open discussion, frank, transparent discussion. The books exist. The books have been translated into English. And I have an article in the community section again discussing the very, very poorly argued claim that it can only be understood by elite scholars or in Arabic. If it's only understandable by a very tiny minority of the world's people, then it cannot be universal. And if it can only be understood by elite scholars, then it cannot be universal either. So, all right. So hit the like, share, subscribe, all of those things, those YouTube things. And let's hope and let Paul know that I've made the invitation. He should know by now. But and then later on, I will choose someone else and see if they'd be willing. I know that the request has already gone to MENJ, or the Muslim apologist, and he basically said no. And he said that I should call into his weekly show. But he's got other things going on. This is a specific, focused session purely on the Sharia. If we have nothing to fear, and they tell us we have nothing to fear, then let's just read it, that the words speak for themselves. Okay, so this is Concordia Seminary. It is one of two seminaries owned by the Lutheran Church. So the man who wrote this thesis is a Lutheran, right? And this is his PhD thesis, Gukhan Bai. His English is not 100%, so occasionally you'll see some weird English. Right, Apostolicity as a church response to Gnosticism in Irenaeus. A thesis presented to the faculty of Concordia Seminary, Department of Historical Theology, and it's pretty good for the degree of Master of Sacred Theology. Okay, so that's all the funny business here. So the Gnostics' use of tradition, living voice, scripture. I'm only going to do about up to page 30, so it won't be the whole thing. Rule of faith, the apostles, Gnostics, and their rites. Were there Gnostic churches? Baptism, Eucharist. Interesting. So he covers early church history. This is 1st century, 2nd century church history. So, right. Irenaeus' use of tradition, living voice, scripture, rule of truth, ministry and episcopal succession, sacraments. That's an interesting portion there. All right. So we're only going to do up to the summary here, page 40. Right. That's all I'm prepared to do today. Let's jump ahead. Introduction. Right? The early church history is a record of changes that occurred in the church. So the church was developing, right? The church was to some degree suppressed by the Romans. There were killings of Christians, of course. They couldn't always meet. And also the texts weren't always available. And for 400 years, there was no set canon of the Bible. Yes, oddly enough, Jesus didn't leave behind the Bible. He didn't go and drop a book and say, hey, just read my book, by the way, right? So it took a long time for the church to decide which were the relevant books which needed to be included in the canon. So in the form of tradition, a great change was made from oral tradition to written one. So now we realize there was no written Bible for a long time, or there were maybe fragments of it, portions of it, but not complete. So oral tradition played a strong role. So what did we do before sola scriptura? Because the apostles could not have had sola scriptura. We know that sola scriptura effectively refers to the New Testament for all intents and purposes. So therefore, the apostles didn't have it, right? They weren't written. The early Christians didn't have it. So what did they do before sola scriptura? Still waiting for an answer on that. So, okay, so a great change was made from oral tradition to written one over time. Written copies of the various books of the Bible appeared, right? The earlier prophetic ministry died out and bishops replaced the apostles. Okay, bishops replaced the apostles, so the heads of the church were the bishops. Prophets and teachers as authorities. So the struggle with Gnosticism brought about the development of the triple authority in the church, that is, the canon of the canon of the New Testament, tradition, and apostolic succession. So this Lutheran, this Protestant, okay, is telling us that because of struggles the church was having with heretics, it needed to clarify its language. It needed to develop its doctrine. In other words, there were certain oral traditions in place, assumptions. And therefore, I thought the KJV was written in 33. Jesus only left 11 copies. The problem is there was no Kinko's, there was no printing press. So therefore, they couldn't rapidly, print enough copies of the KJV to get it out. The printing press came a lot later. So therefore, when the apostles got killed, probably the Romans burned their KJVs. So yeah, the KJV was only rediscovered by Martin Luther in a monastery in the 1500s. Believe it or not. That's the official story. Martin Luther discovered the Bible. He'd never seen the Bible, never read the Bible, never been shown the Bible. Even as a monk, an Augustinian monk at seminary, he discovered the Bible one day in a room. That's a story I have to go into one day. It's a ridiculous story. Martin Luther is obviously lying. He's exaggerating for effect. It is propaganda. So we'll talk about that story one day. Okay. Oh, by the way, and thank you. I did buy, for those of you who know, I did buy the Luther's Works, volumes 1 to 55. Fantastic. Thank you very much. With your support, we did that. So let's see here. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Right, so in response to the attacks by the Gnostics and heretics, the church had to clarify its doctrine. So therefore, they said, hold on, to defend ourselves, we need to rely on the canon of the New Testament. We cannot have any old random canon, right? We decided, the authority of the church decided on what is in the New Testament. We can't have the gospel of some random person written by a Gnostic included in the Bible. And tradition, they relied on tradition. This would be part of the oral tradition, part of the learnings passed down, not written yet. And also apostolic succession. So with the passing of Gnosticism, blah, blah, blah. So the importance of the liturgy and synod and council was growing. The importance of the liturgy and synod and council was growing. So this is interesting. They weren't simply just, well, I'm Brother Bob, that's Brother Mike, and we're preachers now. So what happens is, the Dewey Reams. Yes, no, the KJV came later. Okay, fine. You're right, Cryptic Lama. Yes, you're right. Jesus left the Dewey Reams. Probably. Right, so understand, there was the liturgy, the synod, and the council. So clearly, there was some kind of authority structure within the early church as well. And appeal to patristic authority increased, thus almost every area of the church suffered change, gradually or rapidly. The church had to develop in response to threats. Right? Now they speak here that after the time of the apologists, they had a thing called paradosis. Right? He mentions this word of paradosis. So let's have a look at this word paradosis. So forgive me, the text is very small here. I'll have to read it to you, but I can't make it bigger. So the word paradosis refers to the way that Christians pass down their faith from one generation to the next. This includes the teaching of Jesus, who revealed God's message and salvation. These teachings are spread through the Holy Spirit to the community of believers, the Christian church, right? So that's the community of believers. Now, one of the issues that the Catholic Church had with Martin Luther was he redefined the idea of ecclesia to, instead of the church, into a community. So he wanted to remove the authority of the church completely and then say, okay, it's a free-for-all. Everybody can make up their own Christian views. Right? So paradosis includes many forms of expression like core beliefs, worship songs, and chants, symbolic rituals, formal ceremony, church rules, and church leadership roles. So notice this Lutheran is explaining to us that these things were fundamental within the early church. Leadership roles, okay, rituals, formal ceremonies, formal rules. All of these diverse traditions came from what the apostles originally received from Jesus and spread to others. Interesting. These are meant to carry on the one true message the apostles proclaimed, right? And paradosis also means proclaiming the story of Jesus and what he accomplished, passing on Jesus' words and examples, following the standards of conduct that Jesus taught, and guiding how Christians should live and work together. Through paradosis, the church serves as the means for preserving and spreading the teachings and traditions of the faith. Paradosis connects Christians to the church's origins, but also applies to the present day. It expresses the saving truth of God's message and gives hope for the future. Notice this is very much reliant on Scripture, on doctrine, on faith in Jesus. This is not simply just a bunch of wild rules that you simply have to follow. Right. So in essence, paradosis refers to the transmission across time of the core Christian message of salvation, including the teaching, tradition, and institutions. Interesting. So there are teachings, traditions, and institutions. Now, I say this because from a Protestant point of view, you constantly hear that traditions of men, and tradition has to go because we've got Jesus basically just sent through Ethernet messages into our brains. Like, okay, that's what the Gnostics claimed. That makes you a Gnostic, not a Christian. All right, okay. So when we read the writings of the post-apostolic fathers, it is not difficult to see that the key term to them with respect to authority was the Lord or Christ. So therefore, they were very much reliant on Jesus. So therefore, the Catholic Church, if it is the oldest church and the first church, it was reliant on Jesus first. The primacy of Jesus, not the primacy of Mary, not the primacy of some random set of rules, but Jesus was first, and Jesus was expressed through the scriptures. So he was regarded as the only authority of Christian teachings, right? So the writers of the period appealed directly to the Lord for their teachings, right? And they relied more on the Lord himself than on the apostles, because the apostles were not originators of the Christian religion, but the witnesses to it. Now, in Clement's first letter, Clement urges Christians to keep Christ's commandments. Interesting. Why should you keep Christ's commandments if it doesn't matter? Because God has elected you, and therefore you don't have to do anything. So why would you say you have to keep his commandments? Understand this, which is works-based, right? So now you have to do work, so you have to do something. And of course, you've heard rituals, you've had sacraments. Paradosis is literally the handing down of something that can be from physical material stuff, handing on to over someone. Yeah, in this context is what he said exactly. Yes, I looked it up, Author Christos, but thank you. Yeah, you have a good understanding of Greek, obviously, so thanks for the corroboration. And it says here, now remember, he's writing in this Lutheran, this Protestant, he's writing in context of the Catholic Church. Jesus Christ is our salvation and the mirror of God's pure and transcendent face. So he's not saying that the Catholic Church is in any way violating any of the church traditions here. All right? So, through him, so blah, 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 let me see, go on. Okay, Clement explicitly mentions apostolic tradition as follows. So now we're going to the early church fathers again. So this is Clement. The apostles received the gospel for us from the Lord Jesus Christ. They didn't get a book. They didn't get the Injil, a copy from Jesus. They got the message, right? The teachings. So, Christ is from God and the apostles are from Christ. So there is apostolic succession. And the apostles appointed their first converts after testing them by the Spirit to be the bishops and deacons of future believers. So if they are the bishops and deacons, then you have an authority structure in the church. Aquavitae, handing over. If I give you a burger, am I betraying you or am I giving you a burger? If I hand over a Bible, am I betraying you or handing you a Bible? Pay attention, right? So understand, this implies very strongly here that you have an authority structure within the early church. He's admitting this here, as according to the words of Clement, right? There is an authority structure. Now think about it. If a bishop is always, now a bishop historically was always in charge of a church. The bishop was the top guy in a place, right? Then you had the deacons and the laymen and so on. And you had then, the clergy, and then you had the lay people, right? So what this implies is that there is always an authority structure. Now, if there is one church, think of this, if there is one church only, then you're going to have a bishop that's ultimately going to be in charge. That would make logical sense. And that would be the Pope. That would mean if there's one church, one single church, one united church, then it's ultimately going to be one bishop. If every region has a bishop who's in charge, then every bishop at some point would be responsible to a senior. Because if everybody does his own thing, his own way, you're going to have fracturing and division. Welcome to Protestantism. And yeah. Okay. Now it says here, our apostles appointed the officers we have mentioned. Furthermore, they later added a council to the effect that should these die, other approved men should succeed their ministry. So there is an idea of apostolic succession and authority. The idea of the apostolic tradition in the ecclesiastical ministry has clearly appeared. So you can say, well, look, it didn't exist in the first 10 minutes of Christianity. Yes, because the apostles were alive. Now, of course, if you want to claim that you can only go with the very earliest traditions, then you're going to have to say, well, are you worshipping in a cave? Are you being killed by the Romans? Well, you're not doing the right Christian thing. So please hand yourself over for you being eaten by lions in the circus and go worship in a cave, right? So that obviously is ridiculous. So the idea of the apostolic tradition in the ecclesiastical ministry has appeared. So these are gradual developments within the church. Okay, so let me continue. Let me see if there's anything here that I need to get to. No. Right, so next. According to Clement, the goal of peace and harmony in the church has been handed down from the beginning. Peace and harmony. In other words, everyone has to get along. But this is not the church of nice, where everyone just has to be nice to each other. He's speaking of a single church operating in harmony. The admonitions are all enforced by Old Testament examples. Interesting. The well-known phrase in Clement, the glorious and holy rule of our tradition. So here's where you're going to start declaring Clement a heretic for following man-made tradition. Okay? Or you have to say, well, this is an early historical example and therefore it has validity, as opposed to 1600 years later where people were making up something of their own. That's when Matthew 18:15 comes in, that Protestants, they can't excommunicate someone out of the church because they could just go to build their own new church down the street. Exactly. That's a fair point. You see the logic, only love. That's a very good point. So nothing but the rule of tradition. Okay, so the glorious and holy rule, nothing but the rule of tradition, which has come down from Old Testament times. So now you've got a continuation of Old Testament tradition, but it's now obviously with the new covenant. So this is a continuation of the Jewish tradition from the time of Jesus into the now Christian tradition. Arnold Erhard holds the idea of the apostolic succession in 1 Clement forms part of a repeated attempt to prove that the ministry of the church was the continuation of that of the priests and Levites in Israel. He calls this apostolic succession a priestly succession. Notice the Levites were a priestly class, so there was a class of clergy that were separate, apart. You didn't have, as Martin Luther redefined the word ecclesia to mean this general group, everybody's now a Christian, everybody, understand? No, he said no, you have leadership. And this goes against Protestant tradition, right? This already calls into question Protestant tradition if we read this. So let me continue to page 8. This is page 5 here, but page 8 within the PDF. All right. Now, he mentions the Didache. He says earlier above that the first letter of Clement is the oldest known Christian text. We know now that the Didache is even older. The Didache is now regarded by many scholars, after much more time and research, to be the oldest Christian document. It's a catechism. And when you read it as a catechism, it is very Catholic. I mean, it is distinctly Catholic in its practices, its wording, and so on. So he says here the Didache probably composed about 90 to 100 AD. However, we now know that the Didache possibly dates as early as the year 47, 48, right? And many places now 50 to 60, right? So now he says here we cannot ignore Jewish elements in the Didache, but the Didache begins with the introduction of the Lord's teaching to the heathen by the 12 apostles. But so it says here, you must elect for yourselves bishops and deacons. Interesting. So they have to be bishops in the church, which already tells us you have an authoritative church structure. So on top, you have bishops and deacons. But of course, those regional bishops and deacons were all supervised by the original apostles. James was considered the head of the church at that point, right? So then and of course then Peter is, we'll get into that, but understand there's a leadership and there's a hierarchy. So again, this goes against many, many groups that are like, we're all equal, we're all communist Christians because we all have a say here. No, right? So elect yourselves bishops and deacons who are a credit to the Lord. So they have to pass a certain moral standard. And, oh, by the way, tomorrow I will be talking about Martin Luther. I will do an exclusive session just on Martin Luther versus reason. Everyone has been asking me to talk only about Martin Luther. I will do that tomorrow. And yeah, I've called it Martin Luther, the clown of reason, because clearly the man was a clown when it came to reason, an absolute clown. So they are directly connected to the Lord. So you are responsible to the priests above you, and the priests above you have to take on the responsibility of being priests who serve God. Okay, so let's continue. Then the speak of Ignatius reveals the same tendency. Comparison with Clement's first letter and the Didache. Ignatius emphasizes the monoepiscopate, right? But he says, where the bishop is present, there let the congregation gather. Just as where Jesus Christ is, there is the Catholic Church. He didn't say the Calvinist Church. That's crazy. How could he not? Because Calvinism is original Christianity, according to Calvin anyway. So oddly, there's the Catholic Church. Without the bishop's supervision, no baptism or love feasts are permitted. Interesting, the bishop had authority over tradition, right? Over activities that took place in the church. Ignatius compares obedience to the congregation to the bishop with Jesus Christ's obedience to the Father. For the Lax Lucifer talk, 7 p.m. tomorrow. Same time tomorrow on my channel. Same time. So Ignatius, so understand this, again, this goes against this constant Protestant tradition that I keep reading about. We don't follow the traditions of men. I can be my own church. I can be my own interpreter of scripture. Obedience to the bishop guarantees the unity of the church. Therefore, nobody must do anything that has to do with the church without the bishop's approval. What do you guys think of that so far? Nobody must do anything that has to do with the church without the bishop's approval. Well, I'm a bishop now because Jesus spoke to me in my head. That's a common Protestant motive, but that's also exactly what the Gnostics did. Your thoughts on that? I mean, do we then discard this, or do we go, okay, well, those guys don't follow this rule, so is that in violation of early church tradition, and therefore is it questionable? Does it call these practices into doubt? Okay. So, yeah. Okay, let's continue. You're welcome, Stephen Snow. Thank you. Yeah, same time zone as today. Next week my time changes, but for this week I'm still in the same time zone. So Ignatius had a great concern about heresy and suggested the idea of unity in the church, not in the churches. Like, let's all be nice to each other, even though we completely disagree on half our doctrines. He was like, no, there's one church. The church needs to stay together. We have our set doctrine, all right? And which is fully developed later in Irenaeus. So you've got Ignatius developing doctrine that Irenaeus later fully develops and as full church doctrine. Right. Polycarp, Bishop of Smyrna, and a connection link from the Apostolic age to the sub-Apostolic age. Okay, so he doesn't make mention of it, but they had no need to, I would think. So as this guy, we can find a foreshadowing of the later developments of the idea of apostolic tradition. Paul, according to Polycarp, personally taught the men of his time in Philippi the word of truth and laid it down in letters so that they may grow in faith delivered to them. Okay, so there's a foreshadowing of the later development of the idea of apostolic tradition. Let me see. I didn't miss any comments, right? Here, the faith delivered means the whole of Christian doctrine which is taught and handed down by the apostles. Now, hold on. Again, we're talking tradition passed down by word of mouth. Now, of course, Paul wrote letters, but we also know he visited these churches. Not everything he said was written down. So he had things that were written and there were things that were spoken. So they were following tradition. They didn't have these Dewey Reams or KJVs. There weren't a lot of them, right? Paul kept his own copy, didn't share it with others, right? He'd do the reading on a Sunday, open his Bible, but otherwise he didn't share it, and therefore there was no Bible at the time. So how could they be doing sola scriptura? The sola scriptura argument, when I look at it, it absolutely falls apart. There is no basis whatsoever in logic, history, in just practicality for sola scriptura. Right? So this is purely oral tradition, doctrine handed down. So again, traditions of men. Right? So he says here, the faith delivered means the whole of Christian doctrine which is taught and handed down by the apostles. This faith is for Polycarp a mother of us all and goes back to the apostles. Excellent. Right? He goes on to say, the consciousness of the apostolic tradition has been steadily growing, largely because of the heretics who denied basic Christian doctrines. So the church, there wasn't this degree of disunity in the church. Everyone knew because everyone assumed that the idea was just the traditions had permeated, right? They'd simply permeated the Christian community. They were just doing what was assumed, right? What had been handed down to them. However, because of heretics coming along and bringing new ideas, innovations, heresies, errors, right? Contradicting established church tradition, they had to go, hold on, what are our arguments against these Gnostics and against these heretics? What do we stand on? Ortho Christus says, you are steadily but surely treading down the centuries-old debate. Pope was synodal church, not Protestant chaos, of course. Yeah, no, it's pretty, yeah. Well, I mean, look, if this is the early church, then this would be the case, okay? Only Love says that's 2 Thessalonians 2:15, written in oral traditions, handed down. Yes, Only Love, thank you. Okay, so because of threats against the church, because of attacks, the church had to develop and clarify its doctrines, had to start writing things down that had previously not been written. They had to develop procedures, methods, okay, and so on. Justin, circa 100 to 165, considers the apostolicity of the Christian teaching as an indisputable authority. So Justin considers the apostolicity of the Christian teaching as an indisputable authority. And remember, Calvin and Martin Luther both claimed to be speaking for Jesus. Luther claimed to be speaking directly for Jesus. Jesus was like just talking through his mouth. And Calvin made the flat-out claim that his teachings was apostolic to the core. First century, much more so than the Catholic Church. Of course, Mr. John Calvin didn't know what he was talking about. Okay, so in the first apology, the apostles handed down the prophecies about Jesus to the Gentiles and handed down what they received about the Eucharist. For Justin, this apostles handing on is authoritative because they handed down what they had heard and seen as eyewitnesses to God. Interesting, no Bible yet, okay? All right, so in this sense, the 12 apostles seem to have been important for Justin. And phrases such as, we have learned, we have been taught, we have received, and it has been handed down occur with surprising frequency in the first apology. Notice, nowhere here do you say, well, the Bible says, sola scriptura, baby, it's saying in the Bible here, look on page 5, it says over here exactly what I needed to say. Because there was no sola scriptura, because there was no scriptura back then. There was the Old Testament, maybe the Torah, little bits of things. But yeah, so, all right. Now, moving on. So this again goes against the idea, many of the ideas, the very broad ideas that are put forward by, again, Protestant churches and Protestant commenters. Right? It is important to note that Justin considers the apostolicity of the Christian doctrine as a requirement, so that we can really speak here of apostolic doctrine. Right? You've seen that I've been banned. Okay, I'll have to look into that, Elliot Realty. I'll have to look into that, okay? It's, yeah, who knows why. So, I mentioned here that the consciousness of the apostolic tradition has been steadily growing because of the influence of heretics. So again, the church didn't spring fully grown, bang, like an adult, on day one. The church met challenges. The church had to develop in response to growing needs. When you're just 5 people in the church, you guys know each other. You don't have to worry about details. But as you grow, as you spread geographically, suddenly you need to start to develop doctrines. You need guidelines. You need to give people letters, right? So therefore, the church didn't just spring, boom. And sola scriptura could not have been there in the beginning. It absolutely was not. Because in the beginning, there was no scriptura. Elliot, I have no idea. You're the second person that's come to me that's spoken about this in recent times. It could have been some other mod did it. It could have been YouTube did it. YouTube does weird things. I have taken various people out of the ban list in the recent past. So just drop me a comment later. In case I forget, drop me a comment later, and I will just give me the name again, and I will remove it. Take it. Welcome. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so Justin had a great concern about the heretics and that he combated them. The struggle with the Gnostic heretics may have pushed him to rely on the apostolic tradition. One of the most important ideas in Irenaeus is the concept of in the church, where the apostolic tradition is deposited in the church. It is interesting to note that such an idea is already found in Ignatius. If anyone is not inside the sanctuary, he lacks God's bread. He who fails to join in your worship shows his arrogance by the very fact of becoming a schismatic. That is a crazy definitive statement. So now you've got Irenaeus and you've got Ignatius. You are either in the church or outside the church. And if you fail to worship the way that the apostles are doing, that the early church is doing, you are schismatic. Now, that is a blunt broadside, again, on Protestant practice. Right? So what are your thoughts on this, guys? Am I misreading this? Am I misunderstanding this? Am I misrepresenting this? What are your thoughts? Please let me know. Right? If you agree, just drop a 1. Otherwise, your thoughts would be appreciated. I'd like to know, am I misreading this in any way? So, such a designation of the heretics as outside of the church is also in Justin. Right? Now, someone mentioned a couple of days ago that, oh, Lloyd, you're not just attacking the Protestant church. Look, let's be blunt. The Protestant church has attacked for centuries. Now, we'll be doing that in detail. This is coming when I get to the Black Legend, the Spanish Inquisition, which you're going to find out is 99% Protestant lies. And I'll repeat that, 99% Protestant lies. But you will discover that the Catholic Church has been under the attack of Protestant churches for centuries. Absolute, blatant lies by Protestants, right? Lying Protestants left and right. I don't know how else to say it. That's the fact. And we will go through those details. But also, sorry, I lost my point there. But anyway, so if Protestants today would stop lying about Catholics, because the only reason I found out about this stuff, because I kept seeing Protestant commenters blatantly lie in the comments. They would say things, I'd go check them, and I'd discover they're wrong. And when I'd correct them, they would not apologize for their errors. They would just compound these errors by just doubling down. So if Protestants are going to lie, then I'm going to present the truth. This is, you are attacking the Catholics, right? As lying Protestants, even if you don't know that you're doing a lie, you are still repeating a lie, whether you are aware of it or not. You're attacking Catholics. I'm simply revealing the truth. This is history. So therefore, I'm not attacking Protestants. You are feeling attacked, but this is purely, I'm just showing the truth. What I see to be historical fact. I've been both Protestant and Mormon. My brain is a tangled mess that I'm trying to deprogram from. Take it, yeah, get out of that. These words from Irenaeus are very heavy. I wonder what he would think and feel about Orthodox schism today. Yeah, Eastern Orthodox, there's some issues there, man. I've seen EO people say some very weird things. Let me see. Ortho Christus, a historical fact. The Church of Christ had for many hundred years before the split a pope as a visible head. Yes. Can you name Orthodox popes? Yeah. The experience I've experienced the same on literally most streams. The stream creator has the ability to automatically hide your comments even though you see them. Nobody else can. Okay, Ortho Christus. No, sir, I believe you're not misreading it so far. I mean, look, again, this is linked in the description. You can download it, read it for yourself. It's on the screen. You can see it. I'm not making it up. So, okay, so he goes here. Now, he lists heretics such as Marcionites and Valentinians. And Justin states here, they are all outside of our communion, for we know them for what they are, impious atheists and wicked sinners, men who profess Jesus with their lips, but do not worship him in their hearts. These men call themselves Christians. Now, quite bluntly, this very same definition can be applied directly to Protestants. I don't think I'm overstating it, right? So this is something that can be applied directly to Protestantism. These words apply there as well. Here the phrase outside of our communion is used in the same way as outside the church, as used by Irenaeus. These men call themselves Christian is also just the same claim of the Gnostics, which Irenaeus describes. They call themselves Christians. And I think I've demonstrated sufficiently that Calvin has extremely Gnostic views. And we'll see the same within Martin Luther. Very, very Gnostic views. Okay, guys, can we focus on the topic? Elliot, we've already heard you. I've said I will address it. Focus on the topic. Let's stop bitching and moaning, right? Let's get back on topic, right? If you want to talk about fishing or what color your car is or what mags you bought today, then I will ban you. All right? So, okay, also, just an interesting point here. It should be borne in mind that Justin wrote at a time when theological terms were not universally and precisely fixed. By implication here, though, what you have is these terms were eventually fixed. They had specific meanings. What is interesting that suddenly in the 16th century, these terms get redefined. These terms start to mean something else. And now today in the 20th century, the Catholic Church still means the same thing it did in the 2nd century. Whereas in Protestantism, the same word means 5 different things across 5 different Protestant denominations. So that for me is a problem. Like, which group do you go with? Which definition do you go with? Well, I mean, I go with the one that's the oldest, the one that's been first. When folks act like commie fascists, I just boycott and expose them at the end of the day. Okay. Okay, so once St. Charge and Grinch, once again, I'm floored by research ability to make the topic understandable. Thank you. I try really hard. Only love says, just like the Anabaptists in the 12th and 13th century, and people today are still parroting arguments without researching church history. Okay. Now, the words, by the way, the word heresis or heresy is derived from a verb which in the middle sense means to choose, and thus comes to be used of those who follow a particular opinion. So understand, we've already got fixed practice. You've already got words that mean a certain thing, right? Definitions that are becoming fixed at that point. Now you've got people who follow a different opinion. This means they are outside of the church. So by this definition, by these early church fathers, by these major early church figures, the Protestants are outside of the Catholic Church. Now, of course, you may be outside of the church and still practice some truth, but you are also then by definition in error, if not heretical, right? So understand they've got a clear definition here of inside and outside the church. Doesn't mean you're 100% wrong, that you're 100% a heretic, but maybe you are a heretic. Maybe you have to accept that label because it might well be true. Otherwise, you are in error. So Mick says the nearer you get to the actual truth, the nearer you get to, the nearer you get to the time it happened, the nearer you get to the truth. So so understand the use of the word was not necessarily derogatory in the New Testament sense, but later the church followed the Pauline injunction to avoid parties within the one body. Interesting. There was one body of the church, one set of teachings. Now we've got what, 20,000, 5,000? Who knows? Far too many, right? So, and it says here, in the course of time, the heresies appeared in the church. Hegesippus states, right, the generation of those privileged to listen with their own ears to the divine wisdom had passed on. Then godless errors began to take shape, and through false teachers, who now that none of the apostles was left, threw off their mask and attempted to counter the preaching of the truth by preaching the knowledge falsely so called, the Gnostics, right? And heresy was originally an offshoot from orthodoxy. So understand, heresy often looks an awful lot like orthodoxy. All right, so Walter Bauer, the Bauer thesis, man, I got to do a talk on this guy one day. Just also another, here's a problem. Okay, Walter Bauer is the guy that developed certain ideas that are now very, very popular with what to do with the glasses, and that's a very popular Christian apologist who talks about many Christianities. Bart Ehrman, okay? So Bart Ehrman follows the Bauer thesis. He says there were many Christianities. It's like there are many answers to 1 + 1. You can have 1 + 1 = 5, 1 + 1 = 12, 1 + 1 = 9, 1 + 1 = 2. Ah, that's so boring. So the question is, how flexible is Christian doctrine? Can you have 7 sacraments? 9, 12, 1, 0, 2.5, 3.2, 7.6? No. There's only one right answer, according to the Church Fathers. So Christian doctrine is not that flexible. Can you have Jesus never existed, but was just a ghost? We just saw an apparition, and he was actually just a phantom? Or can you have Jesus was born? Can you have both? Jesus was not born, Jesus was born. No, you can't. These are contradictions. You cannot have that. So how can these guys be Christian when they believe something that is utterly the opposite of and contradictory to established Christian doctrine? Christianity is not that flexible. Therefore, Bart Ehrman is just talking out of his backside. As Turner points out, the modern alternatives imply too high a degree of flexibility of Christian doctrine. So I will repeat that. Walter Bauer holds that with respect to the development of doctrine, there was no fundamental distinction between orthodoxy and heresy. And there's a word for this. It starts with a B and it ends with a T and it's got an S in the middle. Okay? This is Walter Bauer. This is the man that Bart Ehrman follows. This thesis is what Bart Ehrman follows. And the word for this is, you know what it is. Okay? Bull, fill in the blank. All right? And he says both arose simultaneously within the church, and the classical view is in error regarding heresy as later in date than orthodoxy. The fascinating thing is that Walter Bauer starts quoting only sources from the 2nd century. So he ignores the 1st century. I wonder why. Probably convenience. Turner points out the modern alternatives imply too high a degree of flexibility of Christian doctrine. Christian doctrine is not that flexible. Didn't I say that Bauer was a friend of Karl Marx? I believe he might have been. I don't know if it's this Bauer, but very possibly, yeah, very probably, if I recall, friend of Karl Marx. Yeah, Karl Marx, Satanist. Okay, so understand, this is a serious issue. This is a major, major issue with Bart Ehrman's ideas. So the Fathers' writings show clear-cut differences between orthodoxy and heresy and always warn against the heretics who held different opinions from the other church. In this thesis, the heretics are the Gnostics. So here you go. The Church Fathers clearly show, and they are railing against this idea of these heretics, they're not us. These are Gnostics. We are this, they are that. Here you've got Walter Bauer going, well, it's very hard to tell the difference, This one is chocolate cake. This one's a brick. This one is dog poo. We can't tell the difference. It's very, very hard. Very difficult. I can't. Can you? Walter Bauer. Yeah. You figure it out for yourself. Left a comment in the email to send you some info about Our Lady of Too Many Clown Noses. Can you leave your email in the chat? Oh, yeah. Okay, James. Yeah, give me a moment and I'll get around to just remind me towards the end. Too many clown noses, yeah. Too many Muslim surnames. Unfortunately, the story checks out. It's not only the Muslims and Jews working overtime to undermine and eradicate, but the pagans. I would, look, yeah, okay. So Nicodemus Serpico, the whole Jewish thing is, to a very large degree, overstated, and that annoys me, right? There are legitimate criticisms that can be made, for sure. but I don't see people making them. I see them prefer lies, propaganda, and trash. So really, I have little patience for that. Little. So please understand, you are in a minefield. You're stepping on mines. And yeah, you and I, we've not sat down. We're not heart-to-heart buddies. That's a minefield. So Bart has a B in the beginning and an L in the end. Yeah, true. Well, okay. So yes, Bart is really copying this nonsense and passing it as scholarship. Yeah, it's complete BS, as you can see. Okay, so let's continue. Now, okay, page 13. I thought I would be moving faster than this, so maybe I'll have to do this more than one. But Irenaeus, now look, I'm hopefully not being biased, but this is a Protestant, right? Writing his PhD or whatever. This is a Lutheran. So I'm assuming that he's coming from a Lutheran bias, and he does. If you read the very first pages, you'll see his beginning thesis, his premise is clearly there's a certain bias. I mean, he has all of this evidence, and he comes to the wrong conclusion at the end because he has to support sola scriptura, sola fide, all of that nonsense. So he's got to ignore all of this and come to the wrong conclusion. So that's there. But notice all of this evidence looks pretty sound. Irenaeus followed his predecessors. Irenaeus fully developed the idea of the apostolic tradition in combating the Gnostics. He gave the concept of the apostolic tradition guaranteed by the apostolic succession in the church a new meaning. For him, everything is deposited in the church by the apostles. Therefore, the apostolic tradition is found only in the church. There is no tradition outside the church. So by this clear definition, Irenaeus is saying if you're a Protestant, you're not in the church. You're not even a proper Christian, right? Maria, the Pope is not above bishops of other jurisdictions. So in other words, Maria, if everyone is equal, that means no one has authority. Therefore, if there's a squabble, no one can make a final decision. There is no final jurisdiction, which means that, of course, everything goes and anything goes, right? That's why we have 90 million Protestant denominations, and the EO is splitting into 5,000 different denominations. And the Anglican Church is itself now splitting into dozens of different denominations. Right? The Pope has to be the final person who makes that decision. He's the chairman of the board. He finally makes that decision. Otherwise, you have anarchy. So, Maria, unfortunately, even your statements here would go fully against the early church fathers. That would go fully against the early church teaching. Now, the question is, do I trust Maria 28, or do I trust Irenaeus, Ignatius, Polycarp, and other church fathers? I personally would go with them. Right, so, continue. Apostolicity, guaranteed by historical succession, was indeed the only weapon readily available with which to meet the attack of the Gnostics. Interesting. So, apostolicity was the only way, by saying, hold on, our connection is to the original founding church. We are of the original apostles. You guys, where the heck do you come from? This was the way that the church had to defend itself. Okay, Maria, I'm going to put you in timeout. Okay? I'm going to put you in timeout. Your statements sound nice. Those are words. They make sense as words. But in terms of the overall concept, the fact that it is possible to say the words doesn't mean you should. So this is your last warning, your only warning. I have zero, this much interest in other people's opinions. It's not the first time I've seen this, and it's probably not the last, but I absolutely don't. I have no interest in that. None whatsoever. We know that when you have that structure that you are promoting, that is the Eastern Orthodox structure. And you know what's happening? It's looking very, very Protestant today. It is fractured. It is broken. It is getting worse. It is worse than people realize. All right? So either remain silent and learn something, or expect to get banned, because I have no interest in just rehashing old nonsense. All right. On the other hand, so historical succession was how they proved. So in other words, church authority. Understand, Irenaeus and the early church fathers fought the Gnostics and the heretics by means of authority. Not by saying, well, on page 5 of the Bible, look over here. It says that Jesus said, and then therefore we're right, and you are heretics. That wasn't the argument. They said, no, we have authority. Authority is invested in us. We have a chain of succession. This authority is invested in us. And that's how they won that argument. So understand there had to be a church, and the church has to have authority. Authority means hierarchy. What did she say? She was saying that the Pope has only jurisdiction over over Rome, and everyone else has jurisdiction everywhere. So how do you agree on an issue? How does a board agree if everyone has equal authority? There's always a chairman of the board. That is normal. Okay, we don't do communist Christianity, right? So on the other hand, the Gnostics claimed that they themselves were ordinary Christians and had the apostolic tradition. Well, so did Calvin, and John Calvin talked bullshit. So did Martin Luther, and Martin Luther was bullshitter extraordinaire, and we're going to be covering a lot of that tomorrow. So, and even guaranteed by the apostolic succession. Now, when you read the Baptist history is the biggest joke. Honestly, it's the worst. The Baptist claims to apostolic succession, the Baptist claim to history is just laughable. I mean, it's objectively laughable. Sorry, Baptists, but it's true. Their doctrines, rites, and other practices were said to have been handed down from the apostles. So notice they were making the very same claims. So how do you separate? If both sides are making the very same claims, how do you separate them? How do you separate them? Behalu's straight. I love your work. I was adopted by presbyters just to realize the church had destroyed my church and my country. The EOTC, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. Okay. Presbyters to PA. What is that? Sorry, I'm missing all the. Just realized the church had destroyed my church and country. The EOTC. Just please rewrite that again, Behalu. Just rephrase that so I can understand you more clearly. Is Lloyd channeling Father Hesse? I don't know. Look, I didn't come at this as an apologist. My job was to make sure you didn't die. That was what I was paid for. Okay, so. Baptists make the claim, dude. You've got to read. There's a thing called Trail of Blood. You've got to read it. It's like the history they present is so laughably funny. I mean, it's you have to mock it. It's that stupid, and it's like, yeah, but it wasn't us. We are the purple raxulated Baptists. We're not the green or non-raxulated Baptists. Those are the guys across the street. They made that claim. Blame them. It's like, oh yeah, because it's that group of 5 people over there in that church, and not your group of 3. Got nothing to do with Baptist practice, right? Nothing to do with that. Good grief. Yeah. Okay. So the EO is not splitting into thousands. Actually, I was exaggerating. It's called exaggeration, but the EO is splitting. There are some serious issues in the EO. Okay, so the Gnostics claimed that they themselves are Christians, and this led to problems. Irenaeus called the Gnostic gnosis, the knowledge, falsely so-called. Okay, so let me continue. So the Gnostics' use of the concepts of living voice, scripture, rule of faith, and churchly rites as apostolic tradition. So this thesis has 3 chapters. The Gnostics' use of the concepts of living voice, scripture, and rule of faith, and churchly rites as apostolic tradition. Here you'll see the Gnostics claim that they were also Christians. Now notice living voice. Now, something to add here. We'll get to what he says later. But what you have is living voice means the Bible's a living document. It doesn't mean it's still alive, it's still breathing. It means, well, it has to adapt and change with modern conditions. Like we have to gay all the things now. As you know, it's very important to gay all the things. So you know what? We have to maybe change a few words in the Bible to gay all the things. Let's just gay all the things, because that's the cool thing to do. That's the cool thing. No, it's not. Understand? So this gave them license to make changes. This gave them license to alter traditions, to alter orthodoxy, to alter what was established. So, yes, so I used to be a Baptist. They taught me that they weren't Prots, that their church went back to the 1st century. Yes, one day as I have time, I'll get around to all of that. It's hysterically funny. I mean, how can you believe it? It's obviously nonsense. So, okay, so the Gnostics appeal to apostolic tradition. So let me continue. Right. The Gnostic use of tradition. Eusebius, the church historian, summarizes a statement of Hegesippus concerning the Gnostic heretics at that time. He says, godless error began to take shape through the deceit of false teachers who, now that none of the apostles was left, threw off the mask and attempted to counter the preaching of the truth by preaching the knowledge falsely so called. Hegesippus is 2nd century. He suggests that the Gnostics used the apostles even though they put on a mask. The Gnostics of that time called themselves ordinary church people. They spoke the same words as the church and appealed to the apostolic tradition just like the Orthodox did. Einar Molland therefore holds that it is not the Catholic bishop who appeals from scripture to tradition, but his Gnostic adversaries. So it may well be that the Gnostics themselves utilized the argument of tradition and apostolic succession first to give themselves a false authority. So they thought they were in the church and claimed that their tradition was the genuine one, which they secretly received from the Lord. They used scripture and seemed to have used some type of the rule of faith. They also had meetings and administered sacraments. Okay, fascinating. So at least in that sense, and we'll learn more about the sacraments administered by heretics. They were copying the Catholic sacraments. They weren't copying the, Anabaptist sacraments. They were administering Catholic sacraments, which means they were copying the Catholic Church. So the Zionists are hunting true orthodoxy. Now, I know this might be controversial. Look, can we stick to Subahelu? Can we stick to the topic? Okay, because 99.99% of the time when I see people use the word Zionists, they're either lying or repeating lies or have an agenda to lie. So let's not go there. Okay, I have roughly no interest in dealing with that. So I've just seen too many lies no, not interested. Okay, and if you're going to start talking about the Talmud says, then yeah, I know the Talmud better than anyone else I know right now. So two wrongs don't make a right. Just because someone else may do something more, that doesn't automatically mean others not doing the same. Okay, not sure what the context is. Okay, so understand. Now, they use scripture and seem to have used some type of rule of faith. They had meetings and administered sacraments. According to Harnack, they even had psalms, odes, and hymns, just as the church did. So notice, they actually copied the church very much. They copied the church. And as I said, if you listen to modern Gnostics, listen to them preach, listen to them have a service, you'd have to listen sometimes for several minutes to figure out, are these Catholics? Are these high church Protestants? Are these Baptists? Or are these Gnostics? It can be very difficult to tell. It can be honestly very difficult to tell. Let's have a look at Harnack, and we can wind down here. I'll finish with an hour. Let's look at this here, Harnack. We need to find out who Harnack is. So this is about Luther, Marcion, one of the early heretics mentioned in this text, and the Protestants. The most famous of the liberal, and liberal not in a good way, the most famous of the liberal Protestant scholars in Germany and the 20th century was Adolf Harnack, from 1851 to 1930. In his book, What is Christianity?, he portrayed Jesus as a historical figure who taught ethical principles and emphasized the importance of love and compassion. In other words, Jesus was a hippie. Right? Jesus wasn't divine. Jesus wasn't the Son of God. Jesus was a nice hippie. He rejected the supernatural aspects of Jesus' life. Now, he's supposed to be a theologian. He's supposed to be a Protestant priest. Okay. Such as his miracles and divinity. Now this Protestant is echoing here Gnosticism. This is Gnosticism. This is not Protestantism, a version of this is Gnosticism from this little theologian here. So yeah, he is a Gnostic, being a Gnostic. He focused on Jesus' moral teachings. He taught Jesus was a human being, deeply influenced by the Jewish prophets, who saw himself as a reformer of Judaism. His portrayal of Jesus was criticized as a departure from traditional Christian beliefs. Well, because it's Gnostic. It's not Orthodox in any way. His ideas had a significant influence on the development of liberal theology in the 20th century. Now, this is in my talk on Hitler. Was Hitler a Christian? And on the whole anti-Christian movement within the Nazis, of course, right? And he had a role to play. That's why I mention him here. He's linked to the Nazis and that whole time and milieu. He advocated removing the Old Testament. Now, oh my, because Marcion wanted the Old Testament removed as well. He didn't like the Jews. Before anyone had heard of National Socialism, because the Nazis wanted to write their own Bible, rewrite the New Testament, and of course remove the Old Testament. At the end of the First World War, he attempted to resuscitate the 2nd century heretic Marcion, who had taught that the God of love in the New Testament had no relation to the imperfect God of the Old Testament. These are two different gods from two different books, two different gods. So these are two separate, unrelated gods. And that Christianity and Judaism had to be totally separated. Martin Luther might have said something about that. As Jewish carnal law, Harnack maintained that the Old Testament as unity lies below the level of Christianity. Regarding Luther not removing the Old Testament from Protestantism, Harnack said, because now he's upset that Martin Luther didn't throw out the Old Testament from the Bible. What an unburdening of Christianity and its doctrine it would have been if Martin Luther had taken this step. But nonetheless, Martin Luther's emphasis on gospel over law meant that Luther's concept of faith is the one that stands nearest to the Marcionite concept. So Adolf Harnack is telling us that Martin Luther's Christian doctrine is heretical. He's following Marcion, the 2nd century heretic. Now, this is something worth considering, something worth thinking about. So bear that in mind. So let me finish this page, and I'll do one more page and we'll call it a day. So he was denounced. So of course, Adolf Harnack was denounced by Orthodox Christians, right? So, and sorry, the Gnostics were denounced by Orthodox Christians, and the Gnostics defended themselves by appealing to their so-called genuine apostolic tradition. Now, think about this. Do you think Adolf Harnack said, yes, I'm a Gnostic, I'm a heretic, yeah, I'm a big lying heretic Gnostic? Or do you think he said, well, we are like the proper Christians, and that New Old Testament, get rid of that stuff, those Jews, get rid of them, change the Bible, because sola scriptura, right? Sola scriptura. So let's edit the Bible. Let's get rid of half the Bible because sola scriptura. And so do you understand the so there you go. So hold on, what is Terry Rudnick saying? Okay, yeah, Terry, this is off topic, so thank you, Dragon, for taking care of that. Let's talk about something else, right? Namely the topic that I'm dealing with here now. So, yeah, so let me say, I always tell my Protestant friends, everything you have it from the Catholic Church. Everything you lack in your theory is because you're not Catholic. Yeah, so fair. So guys, what do you think of this so far? I mean, Adolf Harnack's not going to go around and say, yeah, I'm a Gnostic, right? He's going to say, no, I'm a legitimate Christian. And so when the Orthodox denounced the heretics claimed that they were genuinely within the apostolic tradition. In this way, they attracted many simple Christians to their side. Now, who's got simple theology? There's a guy called, Gavin Ortland? Simple theology. Lots of Protestants, simple theology. We just do simple theology, like, okay, fine, theology for babies. What I don't know, what is that? Well, it seems to be that the Gnostics also appealed to simple theology, not that complicated Catholic stuff. This seems to have been a more acute threat to the church than an open challenge. So this was Christianity that mimicked Christianity. Okay, this was Christianity that looked like, acted like, sounded like, spoke like. Do you understand the difficulty? Gnosticism is not something that you look at and go, yeah, that's wrong. It can look almost exactly like Orthodox Christianity. I think we should end here, and then we'll tackle Living Voice next time. That is true. So look, when you ask non-related questions, it just puts, guys have spoken about what car they're going to buy and what color it's going to be and what mags they're going to put on. Like, okay, that's got nothing to do with my conversation here. So hopefully you've learned something. Hopefully this has been helpful in giving you some perspective on, remember, I'm not using a Catholic. This is not a Catholic text. This is a Protestant text. And all of this that the guy presenting here goes against Protestant tradition, goes against Protestant teaching. It violates and actually shows the incorrectness of the statements made by Luther and Calvin, and therefore all the Protestants that flowed from them. So yeah, this for me is, I look at this and I go, well, there's something wrong in the Protestant church. Okay, something fishy. And yeah, guys, so yeah, you've seen my statement that I've made here. If there is nothing to fear of Sharia law, why would he write that? Who knows? Gnosticism to the core, thank you. Yeah. So quick question, if you have time, how do we consolidate all the evangelists that come to Africa and present the prosperity, flyaway gospel that has ravaged Africa? Okay, so on that question, Martin Luther looked at financial issues within the church. He said, hey, there's financial impropriety here. People are using, there's financial abuse going on. It's called, what was it called? The Catholic financial abuse thing handle. Not tithes, it was something else. So he basically says, the Catholics are using this practice, and of course what happens is, today Protestants have their own version of it, right, turned up to 1 million, right? So now you've got the prosperity gospel. This is exactly the thing that Martin Luther called the Reformation of it, supposedly anyway, right? He supposedly used this whole, what do they call it? Not the tithes, the thing that Martin Luther was all upset about. But think about it. The Protestants today are doing exactly, and far worse than what they accused the Catholic Church of. So don't we need a new reformation? And you know what happens if there is financial fraud or financial abuse going on in the church? What you need to do is edit the Bible. You need to introduce new doctrines. You don't fix the financial problem. No, no, no. You introduce new doctrines. You make up a whole bunch of new doctrines. Indulgences. Thank you. Thank you. Indulgences. Martin Luther moaned about and bitched about indulgences. So if you see financial impropriety, you then need to, right? You then need to introduce brand new doctrines and tear down the whole church because you just want to fix indulgences, right? So the Mormon church has amassed 150 billion. So yeah, so I think we then need to tear down the entire Protestant movement because they are doing indulgences today. Okay? Terry Rudnick, you're not as smart as you think. Okay? We all understand people use the same vocabulary. They have completely different dictionaries. People have very different dictionaries that mean very different things. We need to agree on terms. And no two non-Catholic groups agree on terms that mean the same. The word faith means something completely different depending who you ask, right? Basic things mean different things. And when you've got 15 different Protestant denominations that mean 15 different things, where do you stand? You go to the Catholic Church, they mean one thing and it says one thing and that's what it means and it's meant that for thousands of years. So that kind of works for me, right? Okay, so I will call it today. So guys, thanks. So yeah, if Paul Williams is open to having this discussion, this fair, open, friendly, transparent, honest discussion, because we have nothing to fear, that would be great. So guys, I think I should call it a night here. It's been an hour and 10 minutes, but let me read the comments. Oh, and I owe someone an email address. Let me take care of that right now. Let me do that. Give me a second. Okay, so for someone who wanted my email address, there it is. That is a temporary email address. I change those every now and again, but you can use that to send me an email. Quinn Blessed, thank you very much. Marcus Kruger would say, Dan Brown novels helped the anti-Catholic agenda. Yes, I spoke on that already, yes. Kierkegaard despised simple theology, the uninformed churchgoer, he would call them. He was Protestant, but I think Catholics would like him, yeah. He was still a doofus as far as I remember. It's something I read about him, and I was like, yeah, okay. Yeah, Primal Fear, you're right. That had, yeah, these were many, many anti-Catholic novels that were going. Okay, so James Alexander, too many. Okay, James Alexander, I just dropped an email address. I will do this now again. Yeah, I did a statement analysis of the things Mary was saying, and it's heavily rhetorical. She's doing a lot of rhetorical maneuvering. I mean, you're not just being, I speak very plainly, very bluntly, deliberately. I make that as a choice. And you put the facts down, bang, 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 right? And you draw conclusions, where she writes word salads, like these long, convoluted paragraphs. You're like, okay, just it's confusing to follow the logic. Just be right simply, right plainly. And I think this gives one wiggle room. And for me, that's a problem. But fine, I mean, if she wants to start defending the standard Islamic narrative, Mary with a Muslim surname, if she wants to do that, then great. Harb, I mean, Harb is Arabic for war. It's a Muslim term. It's the Arabic term for war. So, am I baptized in the Catholic Church? I have to answer this question like every 45 seconds. Okay, I have been raised in the Anglican Church, right? I live in Poland. It's a Catholic country. I go to the Catholic Church. Everyone speaks Polish. I don't have a clue what the heck they're saying. So, but again, I mean, so if I said I was Baptist, you're going to go, well, all this information is suddenly wrong because he's a Baptist. Not a word said correctly there. Everything wrong because he's a Baptist. But if a Catholic had said that, it's 100% right. Look, I mean, just for the record, they are Catholic assholes. Loads of them. Met them, seen them. Are they Protestant assholes? For sure. Okay? So, yeah, but excuse my plain speech, but I've met a few and it hasn't left me impressed. So, my cousin is vicar. I have a bishop. I'll raise you a vicar and I'll see you a bishop. Tomorrow's my next live, guys. I'll be doing Martin Luther. Actually, let me go there. Let me just show it to you. Let me go here. So tomorrow I will be doing Theological, Dr. Martin Luther, Reason's Clown. Why? Because Martin Luther was a clown. So yeah, we will be looking at that. So that's for tomorrow. So let me, oops, not that one, that one. So any last questions or did I miss anything? No, I guess think not. So tomorrow at 7. And guys, that's it. So good night, and we shall see you all tomorrow. Okay, take care. See you at 7 p.m. And then I'll do the rest of this another time. I'll go through this thesis, but it's in the description below. Download it. Have a look for yourself. Thanks, guys.